Before we get started, just a few tips for everyone who's on the line. So I see that most of you are quite familiar with Zoom at this point, but keep yourselves muted no need to share your video unless you want to. We're going to be taking questions at the end. My name is Andrea Sato, and I work with Michael Bellicosa at Wilton Library, and I'm your host tonight. Thank you for joining us. We'll take the questions either live, if you want to mute yourself at the end of all three panelists' presentations, or in the chat. And we'll keep track of the questions in the chat and can answer them at the end of the presentation. So with that, I just want to welcome everyone and glad to do a mini introduction for our panelists, our presenters. We have with us Maurice Segall, who is an attorney mediator, Matthew Chamberlin, who is a financial advisor, and Lisa Williams, who's a divorce coach. And they're very experienced in this field, and I think you'll learn a lot from them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maurice.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm Maurice Segall, and I'm here with my colleagues, Matt Chamberlin and Lisa Williams, and thank you for joining us. We hope you find this to be educational and informative. As Andrew said, Andrew, thank you and to the library for hosting us. Please do ask questions. You can ask them verbally or put them in the chat, and we'll try to address the questions after the talk. We're going to take turns doing this presentation. I'm going to go first and turn it over to Matt and to Lisa. Again, we'll each just give a quick introduction, a little bit more introduction about ourselves, and then we'll start the presentation. So I am an attorney mediator. I've been practicing law for 33 years, and I have an office in Wilton and in Stamford. And I work as a divorce mediator, helping clients as a neutral to actively get through the divorce process in a non-adversarial and private and fair and cost-effective way. Been doing mediation since the mid-90s, so for a long time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's me. I'm going to turn it over to Matt. Just introduce yourself.
Greetings, all. It's a pleasure to be with you. We are, I often speak for myself, but we're all very sensitive to this topic in people's lives. And one of the things that I've been delighted to be able to work with Mo and Lisa in helping families transition through this process. If you're here for yourself, if you're here for a friend or a family member, we hope that you will learn a little bit more about the process. We've been through it personally and professionally. We're very familiar with it. I've helped in all kinds of divorces, and I'm as a non-attorney, I'm entirely too familiar with mediation, collaboration, and trial. And one of the things that I love about mediation is it's a negotiation. Some people on occasion describe divorce as a business process or a business process of breaking a partnership, but we know that all emotions are involved. So one of the things that the three of us bring here for you all are resources to be very sensitive to the humanity of what this is going on. My background, originally I was in hedge funds. I've been in the financial world for 34 years. I've traded international markets, stocks, bonds, and currencies and commodities. Then I got into covering clients in 2011, and thus I've been covering them since, both on the institutional level and on the personal level, private level. And I've been involved in the divorce space for a little bit, approximately, I guess, 8 years now. So delighted to be in this partnership with other professionals as advisors to you all, answering questions, as Mo said, probably easiest at the end, if you can remember them or put them in the chat, and we'll certainly be happy to address them. And we look forward to kind of walking you through how we support someone get through the process. Lisa, if I can turn that intro over to you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Williams. I'm a certified divorce coach, and I help people reduce the time, the stress, and the cost of a divorce. Matt, Mo, and I really see the need for a team approach to this. The way I describe it to people is if you go in for heart surgery, it's not just the surgeon when you walk into the operating room. There's the anesthesiologist, the scrub nurse, the instrument nurse, someone who cleaned the room beforehand, someone who cleaned the room after, and all those people together work with the surgeon to make sure the patient has the best possible outcome. So that is what we're going to describe today. Matt and Mo do more of the nuts and bolts of the divorce to get you through the process. I am more on the soft side of what needs to be done. A lot of people end up going into their lawyer's office or accountant or realtor's office, and there are a lot of issues swirling in their heads. I'm the person as a divorce coach to talk through a lot of the issues that are personal to you and a priority to you. And yes, they do end up being legal and financial in nature, but they start with you as a person and what your need is for your family. And my goal is to always keep, if there are children involved, what is in the best interest of the children, and always go back to that for your answers. And I have a specialty in helping special needs families. It's a unique population that really needs to look forward in the parenting plan and in the financial agreement to make sure those children are taken care of as their needs change as they get older.
Terrific. Lisa, Matt, thank you. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go first, then turn it over to Matt. So I'm going to be talking about sort of the objective issues about a divorce, a little bit of an overview of the divorce process in Connecticut, and some things about different ways you can go through the process, mediation, the traditional litigation approach, etc. Turn it over to Matt to talk about the financial issues that are so important in a divorce case. And then to Lisa, she said, for the sort of the pitfalls in divorce and some of the softer but very important issues. Everybody should have a copy of our presentations. So please feel free to use them if you want to, or write on them if you've printed them out as outlines. So I'm going to go first. And the first thing is issues to be decided in a divorce. The other handout that you should have is, which I use in my practice, an issues to be decided list. But in any divorce case, there are the same buckets of issues that have to be decided. And if you have children, in particular minor children, then there are four main areas of things that have to be decided. Now, that's whether or not you are fabulously wealthy or not wealthy at all. You only have one child or three children or four children. It's the same list of issues. The complexity of the issues might differ, but it's the same sort of list of issues. Number one, sort of, as Lisa said, the most important one, issues about your children. Custody issues, parenting issues. How will you parent your children together? How will you make decisions about them together? How will you share time with your children? So it's generally known as what are the legal custody parameters and what are the physical custody parameters. But how will you share time with them? How will you share time with the children on weekdays, weekends, holidays, special occasions, birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day. So that's the most important thing that folks have to decide. How will you make these parenting issues? And just an important thing to know, in a divorce case in Connecticut, I'm going to be referring obviously to Connecticut law, which is where we are. Any issues about your children, whether it has to do with parenting or custody or financial issues, are potentially changeable in the future. It doesn't mean they're automatically changeable, but you can go back and revisit things about parents as opposed to other issues in a divorce like dividing up assets, which is once it's done, it's done. So you have to come up with the parenting and custody issues about your children. That's bucket of issues number one. Number two are financial issues involving your children. And they break down into child support payments. Will there be a child support payment from one party to the other? And what's the amount of child support? Child support in Connecticut is formulaic, and there's a chart, there's a set of guidelines in Connecticut that talk about what how much child support would be, at least what's called the minimum presumptive minimum amount of child support. How will you pay for your children's extracurricular expenses, their sports, their activities, their trips, the bigger ticket items. How will those be paid for? How will you cover, or who will cover the children's health insurance? How will that get paid for, and how long will you cover that for? How will you pay for the children's uncovered or unreimbursed or uninsured medical expenses? How will you pay for childcare costs for your children? And then, importantly, do you want any provisions in a divorce agreement about college, how you will pay for or contribute to college expenses? So bucket number one are parenting issues about children. Number two are financial issues about children. Number three are your assets. And then tied into that are your liabilities. What are your assets and liabilities? What are they worth? Or how much are the liabilities? And how will these assets and or liabilities be divided between you? So that's discussed. And then issue number four, alimony, which can be a support payment from one person to the other. It can go both ways, but usually if there's alimony, it's from one to the other. And if there's going to be alimony, the terms of alimony, how much will it be? How long will it last for? How can the alimony terms be changed? These are all negotiable points. Other issues that are related to these, what I call the big four, what are tax implications? Very important of these decisions that you make. Well, one or both of you need to carry life insurance. How will you, and if so, how much, and who the beneficiaries will be, and how long you'll need to carry it for? How will you handle future disputes, if any should come up? So this is the universe of things that need to be decided by a couple in a divorce. And it's decided really one of two ways. You're either going to decide it yourselves with the help of attorneys or mediators or Lisa or Matt or other professionals, or in a worst case scenario, you're going to have a judge decide. And what I would suggest to folks is you don't want to have a judge decide if possible, meaning you don't want to have to go to a trial on these issues, because you're taking these then very, very important issues and putting them in the hands of somebody else to decide. You want control over these things. But this is the universe of things that have to be decided. Now, how can you go through the divorce process if you're going to be divorcing? There's not one particular way. Number one, one or both people could be pro se parties, which means you're representing yourself in the divorce case. A lot of people, I don't know what the percentages are, but it could be half of the people who get divorced are pro se. They go through the process themselves. They fill out the forms themselves. They try to work out an agreement themselves. You can do that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, because you don't know what you don't know, and you really want the help of a professional in getting through the process properly, correctly, legally. You can use the traditional approach where each party has a lawyer, and the lawyers are talking to each other. They're consulting with their clients, hopefully, but they're talking to each other to gather financial information and negotiate points, and if necessary, have a trial. That's what I call the traditional litigated approach to divorce, which many, many people do, but it can be very costly and can be much lengthier and more adversarial. There is the process that I do primarily, which is mediation, where a couple comes to me as a neutral. So I actively help both the husband and the wife get through the process by helping you gather necessary information and then coming to agreement on this list of things that you have to decide. So I am a neutral. I don't represent either party. A mediator doesn't represent either party as their advocate. He or she doesn't help either party strategize against the other person, but the mediator helps both people get through this process in as fair a way as possible. There's a collaborative divorce. In mediation, collaborative divorce are both sort of forms of non-adversarial divorce. And there are some really terrific professionals that practice non-adversarial divorce. With collaborative, it's a bit of a hybrid. The husband might have an attorney, the wife has an attorney, but the attorneys are acting in a collaborative role. Rather than doing litigation where they're going head to head against each other, they're trying to work together to try to work out an agreement. So in a true collaborative divorce process, the husband sitting at a table with his lawyer, the wife sitting with her lawyer. You might bring in other professionals in the collaborative process, a mental health professional, a divorce coach, a financial professional, all as needed to work out an agreement. But it's all done in more of a collaborative process. And then number 5 is, as I said, some combination of the above. There are many good lawyers in Fairfield County and elsewhere that do divorce work who, even though they are litigators, if they have to, they're really collaborative. They are not out just to do sort of scorched earth litigation, but they want to help their clients get through this in a collaborative way. So the point is, if you're going to go through a divorce, you can pick the way that you're going to go through the process, and you don't have to be stuck with one of these methods. In other words, you can try mediation. And if for some reason it's not working for one or both of you, and you feel like you need to bring a lawyer in to a more traditional approach, you can do that. If you want to have your 2 lawyers work in a collaborative approach, you can switch to a collaborative approach. So you have options as to how you go through the process. What professional advice do you need if you're going to be getting a divorce? Well, very likely you need an attorney or attorneys. Even with mediation, I tell my clients, even if you're going to use me as a mediator, I urge them to each get a lawyer, not to fight, but to essentially give each of them a second opinion. To Lisa's point before about if you're going to get operated on and you bring in different professionals, even if you use me as a mediator, as a neutral, I say, go to your own lawyers and just give independent advice. Have them, at least at a minimum, review the agreement you're talking about in mediation. Bounce things off them as you're going through the mediation process. So the attorney to give each person independent legal advice is key. A mediator, if you decide to use the mediation process, you might need to bring in a financial professional like Matt, which can be so important. I help a lot of folks who work out their financial issues in the mediation process, but sometimes we'll say it's going to be very beneficial to bring in a financial professional to sort through the best way to deal with the financial issues. What should the split of assets be? How should the financial orders be set out so they benefit both people? It can be very helpful. Sometimes you need a pension expert. If one or both parties have a pension that is looked at in a divorce as a very valuable asset. And sometimes that pension needs to be valued in order to, decide how much it's worth as an asset. Sometimes you need to bring in a pension expert to help decide mechanically how that pension is going to be divided. There's a term called a quadro. It's a special court order to divide up certain kinds of pensions, and you need pension experts to do that. One or both parties might want to bring in a divorce coach like Lisa to really, and Lisa will talk more about this, but to really help them through the process of divorce and be a sounding board and a support mechanism as you go through the process. Mental health professionals can be very helpful, especially with children. Sometimes people will bring in a mental health professional either in the mediation or divorce or just individually about what's in the best interest of the children, what would be best for the best kind of things for a parenting plan. When is it good to talk to your children about the divorce process? So mental health professionals can be key. Sometimes you need to bring in an appraiser if you have a piece of property that's not a pension, like a house, and the house needs to be appraised. You bring in an appraiser. And bring in meaning you might engage that person for a very limited purpose, but who can offer information to help you make the decisions. If you're going to go, hopefully you don't have to, but in the worst case scenario, if it happens to a trial, like in other trials, you have to bring in an expert witness in a case to talk about the value of a business, to talk about the earning capacity of your spouse. That can happen in a trial. Other professionals have to be brought in. Really contested cases, especially with children, sometimes people need to bring in a guardian ad litem that represents the interests of the children, or an attorney who is stepping into the shoes of a child. The more people you bring in, the lengthier and more expensive it can be, but there are experts that can help you make sound and informed decisions in a divorce case. The legal process, I just want to be mindful of my time. So I just want to talk a little bit about the legal process. A divorce in Connecticut is a lawsuit. I'm sorry it's set up as a lawsuit, but it is one person suing the other person for divorce. Even if you use mediation or collaborative divorce and you're doing things in a very collaborative way, at some point you have to engage the court system because it is the court that divorces you. Now, it does. I tell my clients in mediation, it doesn't matter who sues who for divorce. There's no advantage or disadvantage to being the plaintiff, the one bringing the action. And as an attorney mediator, even though I'm a neutral, I help people through the whole process, even with the legal process. A couple things about the legal process in a divorce. Where is the case filed? It depends where you live. So if you live in Wilton, you're in the Stamford Norwalk Judicial District. That's the court you're in. If you're in Fairfield, or Stratford, you're in the Bridgeport Judicial District, etc. There's a residency requirement to get divorced in Connecticut. It's usually, there are a couple of things in the law which says how you can engage a Connecticut court to divorce you. And primarily it's one party has to live here for at least 12 months. 12 months before starting the divorce action or 12 months prior to the judge banging down the gavel. There are some other criteria to engage the court, and they're stated here on this slide. One of you's lived in Connecticut at the time of the marriage and returns here with the intent to remain. The cause of the marriage arose after either party moved to Connecticut. Sometimes, in some cases, you might live here and your spouse might live in New York or some other state, and there are two states that have jurisdiction where you could bring the divorce action, and you need to sort of think about what's the right place for me strategically, to bring the action. The laws are different in New York, for example, on some issues than they are in Connecticut. But for most folks, if you've lived here for a year at least, you can file a divorce in Connecticut. The divorce papers are fairly straightforward. There's a summons, which is a cover sheet. There's the complaint, which are the allegations of the divorce action. In the complaint, you have to give the grounds for divorce. Connecticut is a no-fault divorce state. So the ground virtually everybody puts down is, I want the divorce because the marriage broke down. That's no fault. It's called irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. There are other factors set out in the law under which you can bring a divorce action, but they're rarely used. Adultery, imprisonment. Most folks just say the marriage, whether or not there was fault, whether there was fault or not, most people just say no fault divorce. The divorce papers are supposed to be served on the other person by a marshal, but there's a mechanism to waive the need to be served. Most of my clients who are in mediation waive that. You then save the hassle and the embarrassment of a marshal coming to your house and delivering papers. You can sign a form saying, I don't need that to happen. Many times people ask me the difference between a legal separation for a divorce. There is a process in Connecticut to get legally separated as opposed to divorce. You frankly don't see it very often. The main reason I've ever seen it when people want to get legally separated is for health insurance purposes. So, because once you're divorced, if both spouses are on one's health insurance, the non-insured spouse can't stay on that plan unless you buy into the insurance. It can be very expensive. So sometimes you can stay on a plan if you're legally separated, both parties, but you have to check with the insurance carrier. Because I think most carriers will say, no, if you're legally separated, it's like divorce, you can't stay on the plan. And if you get legally separated, you then need to go back to court later and convert that to a divorce. Bottom line is you don't see a lot of legal separation. There's also just something called a lis pendens. If you have a piece of property in a divorce case, like a house, many people have a marital home, one or both spouses might file something on the land records telling the world that there is a divorce action out there which could affect title to that property. And it protects you from your spouse trying to sell that property out from under you while the divorce is going on. Oftentimes in a litigated divorce, the lawyers will suggest you file a lis pendens just for protection. The other thing, this is important, that get attached to the initial divorce papers are automatic court orders. The court imposes orders on people when the divorce action starts. And the orders affect both both of the parties when the divorce action starts. And essentially they try to tell people to keep the status quo. What the orders say in kind of plain English is, while the divorce is going on, do not kick somebody out of the house. Do not change beneficiaries on insurance policies. Do not take on unreasonable debt. Do not transfer assets out of your name. Do not relocate children. What I like to tell people is, don't do the dope. They stop people from doing the dopey things that litigious people will do in a divorce case, which gets folks riled up. So these orders are imposed on both people, and what happens is, if the orders are imposed and one person transfers out or they take on unreasonable debt, they can be held in contempt of court. So what I'll tell folks from a timing standpoint is, if you are concerned at all that your spouse might do any of these things, you want to start the divorce action to get these orders imposed on both of you. Okay, I'm going through a lot of information. I just want to give you really an overview of how the process works. There was something on the divorce papers called a return date. The return date is just it's an arbitrary Tuesday that's picked. In Connecticut, you can't get divorced for at least 90 days until whatever return day or Tuesday you pick. You have an ability now in Connecticut to waive that 90-day period. So what happens practically is often with clients in mediation, we'll go through the whole mediation process, come to an agreement on that list of issues that we looked at earlier, then start the divorce action. And they don't have to wait 90 days because both parties can file a form saying, we want the divorce to happen sooner than that. If you have minor children, then you must take a parenting education course, both parties. It's a 6-hour course. It's offered by different social service agencies all over the state. It costs $150 unless you can't afford it, you can get that fee waived. And a lot of the providers offer some of the providers offer the course virtually now, in the age of COVID. So it's offered on one 6-hour block on a Saturday or 2 consecutive Wednesdays. And it's really a great course. It essentially touches on how you deal with your children in the context of divorce, how you deal with each other and your children in the context of divorce. And whether you have a child, a minor who's 1 or 17, you still must take the course if you have a minor child. Activity during the court case, it's changed during COVID. Matt was referring to this before, or maybe before the call started. There are a lot more divorce cases, but cases have really slowed down in the court system because of COVID. It's much harder to access the court. So litigated traditional cases are taking longer and longer to get to a resolution. It's harder to get in front of a judge. It's harder, if not impossible, to get in front of a judge in person. And clients are getting unbelievably frustrated that their case isn't moving forward. Another reason why it's good to do mediation or collaborative divorce, you have more control over the timing of the process. If you reach an agreement in your divorce case with mediation or your lawyers, and rather than have to have a judge decide it, you can file that agreement, ask the court for what's called an uncontested divorce hearing, and have the judge approve your papers, perhaps in a matter of days. Where contested court cases are now taking, they used to be 12 to 18 months, some are taking 2 to 3 years to get to a resolution. I mean, that said, if you're in a contested divorce, parties sometimes have to file what are called pendente lite motions, temporary motion for alimony, temporary child support, temporary custody of the house. Sometimes these things are necessary when people are, really more adversarial. It's just harder to get those motions in front of a judge and get ruled on. The court does have these intervention techniques to try to get people to resolve their cases, but again, harder to get in front of the court for an intervention technique. Sometimes you have to have a trial. As I said, hopefully not. Probably less than 5% of cases go to trial. Sometimes people go through the whole litigation process and then have a trial settle on the eve of trial. And it's probably the same settlement you're going to reach if you did this in a more collaborative way. It's going to take you a lot longer to spend a lot more money. What are the costs of a divorce case? There's a $360 court filing fee anybody needs to file to start the divorce action. There's the parenting, the cost of the parenting course, $150 each. Then the cost can go from who knows to tens or multiples or hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you have to pay for your attorney, the mediator, expert witnesses, GAL is the guardian ad litem for your children, an attorney for your children, a therapist. Look, we've all heard probably these terrible war stories about how much these things can cost. One of the advantages to the work that I do as a mediator is it's much, much more cost effective because the parties are talking to each other, not through professionals. So as a therapist who I had once worked with said, she tells her clients, you can pay for your kid's college or your lawyer's kid's college. So you can decide. Look, I give you a lot of information. I want to leave room and time for Matt and Lisa. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. If you have additional questions for me, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me, phone, email. There's information on my website, which you might find helpful, including that list of issues, which you can actually download from the website. And we are here, the three of us, to be a resource for you to help you through this process. With that said, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Greetings all. I'm going to get this get this up straight. Here we go. Okay. So make sure that I'm sharing my screen, and I'm going to make sure that I have the presentation up. So
That's
we have
Lisa's
presentation up right now. So I'm going to take that off for a moment. I'm not usually, let's see, I'm going to stop the
You
share
want
for
to
a moment.
stop your
I will
screen.
get my I have 4 presentations up in front of me, and I want to make sure I get the right one. Let's see. Nope. And then, so whilst I'm fumbling through my, there we go. Okay. Slideshow, the beginning. Beautiful. All right, here we go. So I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to start the screen share my screen, and hopefully bring up the correct presentation. So how do I look?
Great.
Mo, do I look good? Wonderful.
Looks good.
So greetings all from the beginning. So it looks a little prettier. There we go. So as each one of us presents, for you viewers, depending on where you are in the process, we are very sensitive as your team. Let's just call us your team, because you can pick whomever you like, whether you like us or not, another, but you know, your team. You're going to go, there's a lot of details to getting a divorce. You don't need to take them all on at once, as Mo has done his best to give you that overview. It appears to be a lot of information, and it can be, but that's why you're not doing it alone. And depending on how complicated your marital situation is, we're very sensitive to that. So we've been through it with many people, and every time it's a little bit different, kind of like home cooking, but it's the process is the process, and hopefully common sense will prevail through it. Sometimes people in the process of divorce will kind of be working out relational stuff. They'll be working through upset with the other party. We're mindful of that. We're going to try to stay away from that. As I kind of walk us through with you these financial decisions, these feed into what Mo has guided us on, what Lisa will guide you on, what the process. So let's get into the financial decisions around divorce. Let's be mindful that if we're the party in the partnership called marriage that was more familiar with paying the bills, or more familiar with different financial statements, etc., that part of it's going to be a little bit easier for us. If we're the party that, you know, divide and conquer in a lot of relationships, if we're the party that wasn't involved with the bill pay and wasn't involved with that as much, there may feel like a lot more to kind of get caught up on. Let's respect that. The learning curve might seem steep at first, but that's why we encourage you all to have professionals with you, because there's going to be questions that, you know, you're not going to have had presented before, not have to have answered before, that we can, you know, we can help with. So we're happy to do that. When it comes to, I kind of like into the financial aspects of it. When it comes to, like, you've all written a grocery list before. And on that grocery list, you've put together the ingredients to whether you're going to cook the entree, you're going to cook the whole meal. When we look at the financial picture, we're going to gather the individual details, the statements, the history, the income, the tax returns. We're going to gather the information, and then we're going to put it together into a picture. And that picture, in time, will inform us on what the financial aspects of divorce are that have to be decided. So, like a recipe, we follow the instructions, and that's what we're going to do through this little overview on navigating the financial decisions in divorce. So, again, collecting all that information is getting a snapshot of where you are right now. So, where are we right now? With that understanding, kind of the snapshot of where we are right now, being mindful of where do we want to be. We're planning to sever this relationship, and then we're going to get, hopefully, you know, pretty close to an equal share of whatever we've got between the two of us accumulated through the marriage. And we're going to use our professionals to figure out what that outcome is going to look like. One of the things that I learned the hard way in the beginning, and I think Mo does a very good job of kind of leading us through this, is there's generally 3 pillars of divorce. There's the asset division, spousal support if it's appropriate, your attorney mediator will walk you through the parameters for that, and the parenting plan, something that's hugely crucial. But again, a good attorney, mediator or otherwise, hopefully will really kind of walk the individual through. And I, again, as the financial individual, you'll notice at the end of my name, it says CDFA, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. It's my job to really kind of analyze the financial picture that is this current marriage and soon to be dissolved marriage. And you don't have to memorize this. I want to encourage you to realize that you can get all 3 presentations from Andrea, the library. So don't worry about taking notes. There won't be a quiz afterwards. But just kind of in your mind, think about it. What do we have and what do we owe? Think about what we have in the way of assets. And you can see the list there on all our lefts. Real estate, house, equity in the house, retirement savings, brokerage, automobiles, any kind of, and so clarity on snapshot of what assets we have. We'll also, in the same time, get an idea of the liabilities. Is one person covering many bills on credit cards? What does that look like? Are they mostly marital? What debt have we accumulated during the course of the marriage? So the assets and the liabilities, what do we have and what do we owe? And the budget. We've had an income. And we know COVID's been hard and times can be tough, and people could have had it, careers, et cetera, and they may not right now. So very mindful of that, and respectful of that. What does the income look like in the current term and in the recent years? And what have our spending habits been? We're going to have our fixed costs, whether they be rent, whether they be mortgage, whatever they may be, and then the variable costs. Like, do we go out as much as we used to? Can we afford to do that? Do we buy a more expensive, sign up for a more expensive lease, a less expensive lease? So understanding, number one was, what do we have and what do we owe? Number two is, what's our income and what's our spending? And that's all a part of the current snapshot of our financial, horizon. Your attorney mediator, Mo would walk you through what if spousal support's appropriate. How are we going to pay for that? What's that going to look like? Please be mindful that if we've had 1 or 2 incomes in a marriage, we've had one roof over our heads, that's one set of costs for the necessities. If you're going to have people moving out into a separate, residence, which is naturally going to happen in divorce, you're going to have a higher cost of living. So as we get our heads around what's the financial landscape going to look like, let's be mindful that the way we used to live and the way we will live, that if the income is if there was 1 income, it's going to be split in half. Well, if there's 2 incomes, well, it's still going to feel like a lot less money available to spend. So we'll be mindful of that as we plan for the future. Parenting plan, the financial responsibilities. Most covered those. Again, you'll get the slides later, but there are a number of things to think about. And when we do a good job as the professional supporting a person going through divorce, if we're in that snapshot of where we are right now, we're mindful of, if there are children involved, how old are they? And how old are they will mean there'll be different expenses coming up in the near term and relative long term, depending on their ages. And then they'll be, fully mature, they'll graduate, and then hopefully you'll be done with that. Not always true. Maybe they'll come back and live with you, but that's for the future to worry about. So in the parenting plan, we'll be mindful of the financial responsibilities for sure. Now, again, don't worry about writing these all down, but you already come to tonight as guests, trying to figure out, a number of questions are on your hearts. Will I have enough money? How do I get health insurance? What is the division of the property and assets look like? And let's be mindful that divorce assets, in divorce, retirement assets are not the same value dollar for dollar as a brokerage account. Equity in the house is not liquid. So when we think about the financial apples and oranges, so to speak, they're different, they have different characteristics, and we have to be very careful and mindful of, if a person's getting the lion's share of their of the family or the marital wealth in the way of equity in the home, that's not easily accessible. So, and what would that look like? Buying one or the other out of the house. Pardon me. Credit. Have I had my own credit? Is our credit cards in my name, my spouse's name? How does that look? What's our credit score look like based on our payment history? So in the financial analysis of where you are right now and where you're going, we're mindful of all of that.
Matt, can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Please.
Just playing off of something that you said. What's so important to realize is before you can decide these very important issues, you have to do financial disclosure in a divorce case. The first main thing that happens is you each disclose your financial information to each other. And whether you're mediating or you're doing a traditional divorce. In a traditional litigated divorce case, your lawyers spend a lot of time gathering that information on your behalf. In mediation, one of the hallmarks of it is you're each voluntarily, but honestly, bringing your financial information to the table. As a mediator, in my practice, I provide forms for people to gather this information that Matt's saying, but you can't make informed, knowledgeable decisions on these important financial issues until you have full financial disclosure. So I just really want to stress that. People will come to me sometimes and say, we have a deal, hi, Maurice, nice to meet you. Here's the deal. Can you just write it up for us? And I'll say, I will not do that until I know that we've all done financial disclosure. It's all out on the table. Then we make sure that you're making fully informed choices. Matt, back to you.
Thank you, Mo. And to kind of, to be mindful of, it's called the financial affidavit. And as you fill that out, it is what we went over earlier a few moments ago. What do we have and what do we owe? What do we spend? And what's the income? So that financial affidavit is a very useful tool. And sometimes when we go through divorce, some people, they're reluctant to deal with that. And I would really encourage each of us as we'll go through that process on our own. The financial affidavit is such a useful tool of creating that snapshot that, but when we feel it, you guys can't see my hand on my chest, but when we feel the angst of coming up with some of this information, let's recognize that's good feedback for ourselves. Oh, I don't want to come up with a financial affidavit. I really don't want to deal with all that. I don't want to deal with my budget. We learn so much. We learn so much about our spending habits that it really informs our future. So I, as a financial planner, I help in divorce, but long-term, I help clients ultimately with their financial planning. And if we know what our spending habits are, if we know what we have in a disciplined fashion, especially when we're uncomfortable with it, I encourage all of us not to shy away from doing a good, mature, responsible work on that financial affidavit that Mo's going to need in the divorce process with you, but I'm going to need, Lisa's going to need in the future, and it's going to be so useful to you. So don't shy away from it, please. When it comes to who gets what in a divorce, Mo will walk a client through different choices, but we can project different financial outcomes. If I get more of these assets versus those assets, what would it look like? Well, if I get these assets, but there's inherently costs to carrying those, i.e. a house, there's maintenance, there's depreciation for things. Boilers need to be replaced. Let's be mindful that a 401k doesn't require any maintenance. Markets will go up, markets will go down, but it doesn't require an expense to it in the same fashion as a house or other assets. So we're very mindful of that. When it comes to your home, necessities are pretty critical: food, clothing, and housing. Do I stay or do I move? Considerations regarding the children if they're involved. If they're not involved, you have a little bit more freedom. If they are involved, what's the sensitivity? The children are recognizing that mom and dad are getting a divorce, so there's no hiding that. And if the home was a little bit more than it could be afforded, during the marriage, this is our local areas, assuming everybody's roughly from Fairfield County, but could be wider. It's expensive to live in the Northeast. I can go that broad. So the house, whether we stay or whether we keep it, whether we move into a rental, if we consider a rental, we don't have to deal with the land, a lot of the aspects of it. The landlord has to. So in the financial aspects of the divorce, the choices that you're given, we will walk through those different scenarios with you and ask the questions and draw out of you what really matters for you. And you'll get to, wrestle with that. And again, with renting, there's, we all know that there's a lot of things that you can offload on the landlord, and you don't have to fix the boiler, they do. So something to seriously consider. When it comes to the children, as Mose walks you through, the child support in the state of Connecticut is pretty formulaic based on income. But education expenses can be pretty variable. There are certain standards. Typically, if it's assumed that the parents were college educated and the children would likely be, there are standards in the state of Connecticut. Parents will contribute half the Yukon cap. Mo will explain that. But there'll be other expenses that are involved. Are the kids in private school? What about extracurricular, et cetera? So there's a lot of things to consider in that, and you'll go through these steps, all of them, step by step. One of the things that you'll hear from Lisa, just kind of as a little teaser, is when you think about the sensitivities around this, let's think about how this would be experienced if there are children involved, or how would this be experienced for the person that is so unfamiliar with financial that you'll talk to the financial advisor, but you want somebody else walking alongside you. That's where a coach will matter, and that'll help Mo, as well as he negotiates between the two parties, having other input that would be supportive of a person going through divorce. Health insurance, it's a big question. There are options in the state of Connecticut. There's that we can discuss later, but there are ways to do it. And we all know healthcare is a real challenge in this country, and it's not getting any easier. It's just, hopefully there are going to be more choices to consider. Again, preparation. The best thing we can do wherever we are in the divorce is getting ourselves informed, preparing, get our hands on documents. If we don't have them, getting them from the other party, and getting it, working into that, understanding the whole of what our financial world looks like. As your professionals walk you through their areas of specialty, this is what we need right now. Oh, I have that at hand. Oh, I'm familiar with that. So don't shy away from it. When it's uncomfortable, that's natural feedback from ourselves. Say, all right, fine. I'm gonna get that, and I'm gonna get on that. Again, you'll get the slides, so you can go through the shopping list later. Do I have all these things? What am I missing? We get them from the other party. We get them from the source of origination if necessary. And again, granted, we're sharing this information with you all tonight, but when I went through it personally, it was useful to have more information and other people's experience. As you're going through it, don't assume you can do it alone. And the learning curve is difficult to try to figure out how to do divorce when you're in it. So getting the team around you is going to be really useful for you. And at the end of the day, relatively speaking, a small investment in a good coach in any area of our lives will often have a big payoff down the road in getting to a better result, quite actually. Credit is not a part of the assets and the liabilities and the income and the expenditures, but credit matters. And understanding credit is something that we talk about whenever appropriate, if somebody's familiar with it or not. But credit matters in our system, and understanding the whole process. I won't get into that right now, but we can talk about it in the future. But what does it look like? Why does it help me? How will it help me in the future? If I've got a bad history, because of issues with whatever, how do I clean that up? We can discuss that in the future. So it's something that matters a lot. And if you're where you are in the process right now, so the plan for independence, you can do a number of things right now that are within the rules. You're not going out and buying a boat. You're not going to Paris for a month. You're not spending money inappropriately. But planning for independence right now is a really good idea. Checking your credit report, opening up accounts in your name. You disclose those on your financial affidavit. You don't hide anything, but you're beginning to get your feet on the ground if you haven't had it already. And if you do have it, you're gonna have to remember to, at the appropriate time, you'll be getting your own credit cards. You don't take your spouse off before the appropriate time, Mo would guide, but you will be doing that because it's a separation, it's a dissolution. Retirement planning, huge conversation, but that starts at the end of the divorce. You don't try to figure out, the retiring planning now. We worry about that after the divorce. And when it comes to healthcare, we've already touched on that briefly. Estate planning, If you're blessed with a lot more assets, you'll want to get into that more deeply. There's a lot of strategies we can talk about. We don't need to do that right now, but if you've already done that in the marriage, if you've already got trust set up, we need to talk about that. If you don't have a durable power of attorney, if you don't have a living will, things will need to be severed in the way of trusts. And you're going to need to change some things. You don't want the beneficiary to be the former spouse, and that person then goes on to get married, and you never went back and changed your will. So there's things we definitely need to get into. I'm not an estate attorney, but we can coach you on what the right changes are, and then have the appropriate changes made. Again, in your mind, just as a summary, where am I right now? Where do I want to go? And how do I get there? And that's why, you want to have the right professionals around you. At the end of my slides will be this. So when you get the three presentations from the library, happy to have you contact all of us, each of us. We'd be happy to help. And now what I'm going to do, Modi, do you want to say something? Sorry.
I just want one other thing, and Matt, thank you for this. Just an important thing to know in a divorce case when it comes to financial issues. While child support, at least, can be somewhat formulaic, other issues are not formulaic. There's no formula for alimony. There's no formula for the division of assets. There are rules of thumb. There are some guidelines based on a number of different factors in the law: how long you're married, your ages, your incomes, your standards of living. These all go into how you divide these things. But if you hear from people there's a formula for alimony or asset division, there isn't. And all of it's negotiable. There are rules of thumb, but don't go into it thinking, because you've heard from somebody else, there's only one way these decisions get made.
And to reemphasize that, there's going to be a lot of misunderstanding out there in the world. There are going to be people that are upset in their own marriages that want to project that upset into your divorce. Definitely strengthen yourself and talk to pretty neutral professionals. And be very careful not to get advice from people that are upset in their own lives, because we've all seen it, whether we're involved in it or not, we've all seen it. And now I'm going to do my best to smoothly set Lisa up if I can. Because I definitely want. Okay.
Here we go.
All right. So, Lisa, we're turning it over to you.
Okay. Well, I'm to jump off from where Matt and Mo left off. I just want to say first, Mo has a lot of helpful information on his website. I know a lot of this is overwhelming, but just remember, you don't have to become a lawyer, you don't have to become a CPA, and you don't have to become a financial advisor. What you do need to do is start collecting the data. And I've helped people with their financial affidavits. If they get overwhelmed, I make a huge pot of coffee. And the forms that Mo will give you, or any attorney would give you, are basically fill in the blank. So while the list seemed very long when Matt was saying this is all the information you need, it's really a fill in the blank exercise. And it will be anything from calling up your oil company to see how much oil you spend on your heating bills every year, down to how much is your lawn service every year. And the affidavit can be done on a monthly or a yearly basis as long as it's consistent. So it sounds like a lot, but it's like filling in the pieces of the puzzle. And while that can feel painful, it really is a gift you're going to give to yourself, because it's going to give you the information to make decisions and show you what your options are. And the other thing is, I do see people where there's financial infidelity, or one person's a saver, one person's a spender. And once the divorce happens and the assets get split and alimony is paid every month, it's a new start for everybody. And financially, that can be freeing. Yes, a lot of people may have to rein some things in and make some adjustments to what they spend. But other people I've seen, they're not huge spenders, so they're actually saving money every month. So I just want to give that context so it doesn't seem as scary as it can be when you're hearing all this information at once. Okay, divorce coaching. Just to go into it, obviously Mo is the legal guy on the team, but the American Bar Association does recognize divorce coaching as a role within the whole process. It's a flexible, goal-oriented process designed to support, motivate, and guide people through divorce to help them make the best possible decisions for their future based on their particular interests, needs, and concerns. Like Mo said, there is negotiation in this. And as a divorce coach, I help people figure out what's important to them. What do they want to fight for? Which isn't, what is not that important? And to always think about their kids in the future.
Matt, next slide.
Okay, now there are some pitfalls of decision making. All the examples I'm going to give related to divorce, but you may think about this in other aspects of your life. One is considering too few options. People will come in and say, I have to absolutely keep the house. Well, first, we have to look at the financial affidavit and see what is the cost of the house. What are the income and the alimony and the child support potentially going to be? And look at some other areas of options. I mean, some people don't realize you may negotiate to stay in the house until the kids graduate high school and then sell the house or then have someone buy a spouse out. Again, it's in the best interest of the children. If you want to keep them in a certain school district and financially you can do it, you can slice and dice a lot of the decisions many different ways. Matt, there we go. Only looking for evidence to support your ideas. And that goes to the fact that you really need to go into these, can be very difficult, into these meetings and negotiations with an open mind. If you ignore the opinions of others who have a different opinion, or you only talk with friends who have had the divorce experience you want, you're not going to see the whole picture or the picture that really relates to you, your family, and your needs. And again, that friends, every divorce, while the process is the same, I have to believe from what I've seen, the finances, the kids' needs, the parents' needs, there are so many nuances that go into a divorce. So that, what's the choir you call it, Matt? The choir on the side?
The Greek chorus.
The Greek chorus. Try to keep that to a minimum and be open to listening to your professionals to give you some ideas and options to mull over. Okay. Short-term emotions tempt you to make a decision you will pay for later. This is a very emotional process, and many times people might go into a negotiation or a meeting so gripped with emotion that they can't see straight. And that is not the time to be making major decisions or having very, very important conversations. It's best to cool down. And even if you have to postpone something and take a deep breath and go back to the table when you can think more clearly. You're overconfident about the future, how the future will unfold. Some people just think, they're looking at the big picture of, I don't have to move, I keep the house, I don't want much to change. And they're overconfident on how the future will unfold. They think they can afford to take the deal on the table to meet my needs, and you don't anticipate any upcoming or rainy day expenses. And that's why having a financial advisor is so important, especially Matt. He has that designation of a certified divorce financial analyst. So he's looking at all the numbers based on the divorce and the future. So to put the numbers on the financial affidavit and just submit it to the court without really looking at the meat of it, you're really going to miss some details that might affect you later on.
I think the way that the three of us practice, and hopefully other people practice, is goal-oriented. If you come in and say, if you're getting divorced, here's what you'd like to achieve, we can try to help you structure an agreement that meets those goals if possible. So if both parties say, for example, for mediation, we'd like husband or wife to stay in the house with the children for a period of time. Okay, let's see if we can structure an agreement that makes it happen. And if not, if we look at the hard numbers and say it's not possible, we'll go to the next plan. So it's if you can approach the divorce in a cooperative way, you're all better off.
Mhm. Principles for better decision making is widen your options. Take advantage of the professionals that can help you understand what they are, and just know that you don't know what you don't know, and don't feel bad about that. You know, nobody goes into divorce knowing as much as a lawyer, a financial advisor, a therapist, a real estate agent, an appraiser. So don't feel bad about what you don't know. Just make sure you ask a lot of questions. Next.
And I'll put, and a little, in all fairness, having, I love the role of a divorce coach, because there's things that I can offload on the coach. There's emotional discussions, there's priorities that can be examined that are not financial, that are not even the process of being divorced. Thus, the coach is there to walk hand in hand with the client.
Reality test your options, rely on your professionals for advice, discuss the options as they relate to your specific situation. Again, everybody's financial, emotional, kid situation is different. So make sure you get the facts from the professionals, and then relate it to your specific situation. And like, for instance, the real estate market right now, it's hot in Fairfield County. And I hear people saying, I should get X amount for my house if I sell it. And I'm like, well, a real quick peruse of realtor.com is not the same as talking to a real estate agent, getting a walkthrough, getting an estimate, and then actually getting an appraisal.
And Lisa, if I could add one more thing, for all of us that are on the call, forgive me for sounding like continuing to encourage you all to engage professionals, but I do that based on experience. I often deal with post-divorce situations as well. And when I think about people that didn't consider things or didn't have the guidance that would have been appropriate in a more complicated situation, one needs more guidance. That's the reason for encouraging professionals to be around each of you, not from my pocket, not for my benefit or any one of our benefits. I've seen enough post-divorce situations that the divorce wasn't handled well, and the outcome didn't really serve both parties fairly, and that's much worse than going through it and doing the hard work in the now, because you don't want to have to deal with it long term afterwards. So.
And to one other point on Lisa's slide, they're just on the last slide. It's the sort of don't listen to the Greek course and discuss the options as they relate to you. You're going to hear from people if you're getting a divorce about what you should do or what happens in their divorce case. I got this or I got that, so you should too. They don't know your situation. You and your spouse or soon to be ex know your situation better than anybody else. You might come up with an arrangement about something, your assets or your income, that's unique to you but works for you. So you want it to relate to your specific situation, as Lisa said.
Attain distance before deciding. I mentioned this before. Don't make a decision in the heat of the moment. And think about how this decision will feel in 10 days, 10 months, and 10 years. And that really should be the plan, that this divorce agreement and parenting plan needs to work for the day you sign it, as well as into the future. And prepare to be wrong. I mean, this is a whole learning process for you, and it doesn't happen overnight. Look at the best and worst scenarios before making a decision, and your thoughts might change as you're more in control of your feelings and as you get more knowledge and you obtain the facts. I always say knowledge is power, and it'll make you feel more in control. And whatever the numbers end up being on that financial affidavit, there's power in that, because from that you can make decisions and feel more in control. Another mistake is to avoid is throwing in the towel. I know the process gets exhausting. People just want it to be done. But the consequence of not doing, as Matt says, the hard work during it is having to go back to court to remedy what was done wrong in the first place. Mo said certain things cannot, once you sign on the dotted line, can't be changed. Other things you'd have to go back to court for, which means more time, money, and aggravation to do that. Another mistake is taking the my way or highway approach, not listening because you think you're already right. And this can result in increased legal costs, negative court surprises, or you could bypass a good settlement just because you don't want to quote unquote give in. So again, everything in here, there's a lot of gray. It's not just black and white when you're negotiating. Betting the farm on another relationship. This one is important because some people do bet on a new love to take care of you, and really you have to take care of yourself. And the financial affidavit will help you do that. You don't have to do it all alone. The numbers will tell a story, and negotiate for what is best for you and not rely on another relationship. Allowing others to make your decisions, not negotiating because you want the judge to make a decision. Again, Mo said, don't let the judge make your decision. The control is better off with you and your soon to be ex, because you know what's important to your family and what your priorities are, and really what's a need and what's a want. Wanting guarantees and certainty. There is no guarantee and certainty in this. The certainty is you have to take a parenting class. The certainty is you have to do a financial affidavit. There are certain things in the process you have to do, but that whole thing of control is something that has to be loosened. And especially for if someone doesn't want to be divorced or want to let go of the relationship, that can be an emotional process they have to get to the end of. The offer on the table can be reduced or withdrawn if you want a certain guarantee and you have a certain number in mind per se, and the divorce process can be dragged on longer than it needs to. And another mistake is not getting enough information from qualified resources. We spoke about this, about relying on friends and family for advice instead of professionals. And I really encourage people, there are therapists for kids, for adults, for people getting divorced if there's an issue with alcohol or financial infidelity. What you need is out there to plug into your team to help you get through this with the least amount of stress as possible. And that's it. And I want to give you my website. It's www.divorcehelpwoman.com. And my cell number is 203-858-2546. And please call me if you have any questions about what I talked about or any of the information I have on my website. I'd be happy to help.
So Matt and Lisa, and thank you. Thanks again, Andrea, and to the library. Does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, if not, we can end for this evening. We didn't see anything in the chat. Anybody have any questions that they either want to put in the chat or just ask us verbally?
This is Andrea. Let me just jump in for a minute first from the library. There were two different questions in the chat. Maybe they've been answered in the process of your presentation. But one was, specifying the real difference between a divorce mediator and a divorce coach. And the other one was, what if you can't decide on your own approach if the spouse wants to be aggressive?
Well, let me address the second one. You mean the approach being if one person wants to mediate, use collaborative and the other one doesn't. That's unfortunate, but that happens. And what I tell people is if one person wants a divorce and the other one doesn't, you'll still get a divorce. So if you want it and your spouse doesn't, you can still get a divorce. How you go through the process, though, is really a mutual thing. At least for mediation or collaborative, it takes two people to want to agree to do that. If your spouse doesn't want to agree, you're not going to bring them to the table to be able to mediate. And then you might have no choice but to use the more either adversarial, I think the term was aggressive, or litigious approach to divorce. Well, again, when I try to tell people, if some folks are on the fence about whether they want to use mediation, I'll say, look, you're going to very likely reach the same agreement in mediation that you would reach if you do it another way. The decisions that you reach on your children, on your finances, shouldn't change because of the method you use to go through the divorce process. Those issues are based on or decided based on your set of facts, how long you're married, your incomes, your educations. That's what really should decide those issues. So hopefully folks will decide, okay, if we're going to get divorced anyway and reach, agreements based on a certain decisions based on a certain set of facts, let's do this in the most advantageous, cost-effective, private way as possible. Andrew, what was the first question? I apologize. Oh, was the difference between a divorce mediator and a divorce coach? The expertise is really different. I'm an attorney mediator. I bring the expertise of being a lawyer, knowing the divorce law, and I act as a neutral, and I can draft the legal documents you need. There are non-attorneys who mediate, and they're terrific. They're terrific in what they do, but they can't draft legal documents. As a divorce coach is bringing a different set of skills to the process to help people through it, to address, as Lisa said, the pitfalls, the decision making. So you might use a person might use a divorce coach, hopefully in conjunction with a mediator and a financial planner or your lawyer to help them through the process. Andrew, were there other questions that we missed?
And if anybody's on mute and you want to ask a question, feel free, just come off mute.
One of the questions is advantages and disadvantages of divorce in New York versus Connecticut.
Well, I am admitted in New York, but I don't practice divorce law in New York, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert there. Some of the issues are different. For example, I think alimony is more formulaic in New York than it is in Connecticut. There are certain differences in asset division in New York. In Connecticut, the law on asset division is called equitable distribution, which means there isn't any concept in Connecticut of separate assets. Every asset gets looked at. It doesn't mean every asset gets divided, but every asset gets put on the table, regardless of when you got it or whose name it's in, to decide how equitably or fairly those assets are to be divided. In New York, my understanding is there are certain assets that are off the table. Inheritances, I think, are off the table. Assets that have never been in joint names are off the table. That's not the same in Connecticut. So that's one main difference. Child support is also different. I believe in New York, child support goes to 21. In Connecticut, it goes to 19 or graduation from high school. So if you can get divorced in either state, New York or Connecticut, you might want to consult with a professional in each state, a lawyer who can tell you the law in each state, and you can make a reasoned decision about where it makes most sense to get divorced. Other questions, Andrea?
I don't have any more in the chat.
So I think at that point, we're going to sign off. We want to thank everybody. We all hope that this was very helpful. You have our contact information. If we can answer other questions, be of help to you as you're thinking about or going through the process, please, or even want referrals to other professionals that are different than the expertise we have. The three of us are in a network of divorce professionals in Fairfield County, dozens and dozens of people who in their practice touch people in divorce, everything from attorneys, mediators, mental health professionals, financial professionals, realtors, actuaries, appraisers. We can get you to the right person for someone you need. Matt and Lisa, any final comments?
And our contact details are going to be in our slides, or you can get them directly from the library.
Thank you so much, the three of you, for providing such valuable information.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all
Andrea.
for coming tonight.
Good night, all. Thanks.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.